I'm going to introduce Gaurav Sinha. Gaurav is the founder and CEO of Insignia Worldwide, and Gaurav is going to talk about designing the data-driven human experience. So please welcome Gaurav. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. So, good afternoon. I think for about 10, 15 people, this is a very complex, high-tech IT setup where you have to have this silent disco. I've never experienced something like this before, but here I am. Like having not experienced many things previously, can I just trouble the gentleman to get my slides up? And so, you know, I'm very lucky to be invited to these things and be given the opportunity to speak to people attending AHIC. And Jennifer and Jonathan very kindly, asked me to come and speak about a topic that is close to my heart. Clearly, data-driven human experiences is not close to my heart. So I had to learn a little bit about this, and I typically use each of these speaking opportunities as a great way to teach myself something new. So designing data-driven human experiences was, is a new topic because I'm also, somebody who looks at problems in life and says, how do you fix them? So if you think about data-driven dramas that you most probably have experienced with brands yourself, is when your bank calls you for an extra credit card, or a real estate agent calls you to sell you another piece of property, or somebody's trying to sell you a car, insurance companies. So there are some data-driven disasters that usually happen with people. And they usually start with banking, insurance companies, hospitality too. In many cases, you get sold golf and honeymoon packages without people necessarily knowing that maybe you're coming out of a divorce. So there's all these little conundrums that happen with regards to data and how people need to synthesize their own narrative. So when I sort of picked this topic, I picked the topic because I knew that I found companies that use data inappropriately really, really upset me. I get angry. I think about them being very encroachful. They know my personal space. They know my mobile number. They call me and I don't necessarily agree with it. I think marketeers have lost their etiquette in all of this. So there's a certain tyranny to data and technology and how it works. So I decided that I'll take a little bit of time and try and research what are the good guiding principles with regards to creating data-driven human experiences, whether it's hospitality or in any other service industry. So what I'm going to share with you is about four insights that I have found of meaning and purpose when you're looking at creating data-driven experiences. And what I'm not going to do today is I'm not going to be sharing with you data. I'm not going to throw this presentation into numbers. I think numbers and data-driven content you can pick up from STR and Google, and there's enough data for you to look at. But I'm going to approach this purely from a sort of a philosophical perspective. So, the first use of the word data was in 1640s. And when I was researching, I said, what is data used for? Data is collected, analyzed, and used for making decisions and evaluating the effectiveness of any solution that you're recommending. So when it came to, when it came to machine learning and public data sets, it was an interesting thing. If you're all familiar, maybe about 3 years ago, we had massive snowstorms in the US and New York, and flights were canceled, and there was tremendous amounts of upheaval and disruption in flights and air transport and even road transport. There was a lot of havoc. And interestingly enough, while that was happening, during that winter weather period, then the sub-zero sort of temperatures, there was an average of about 3% of flight cancellations every day. 3% of flight cancellations during the winter season meant 90,000 passengers were left stranded who needed a hotel room. And that was every day. And these 90,000 passengers who were stranded needed a place to stay. So there was an interesting hotel company called the Red Roof Inn, which runs a lot of hotel units, their hotel assets are predominantly around airports, who realized that by studying weather conditions and flight cancellations and taking public data or public data sets, they could focus on building their revenue strategy and what inventory they would like to make available at what particular time and at what particular rate. So they did a geo-targeted marketing effort for all their properties within a 3 to 5 kilometer radius of where their hotels were and where these passengers were stranded. And they saw a 10% increase in business for their hotels during that time. So public data sets, whether structured or unstructured, can be valuable sources of information if analyzed properly. Now, this is part of my learning here. Another hotel chain did exactly the same thing by analyzing customer feedback on rating sites and merging it with their transactional data across all their properties, and they discovered that the basic demand was for more storage room in family oriented hotels, because that is the need of the hour that was driving preferences from a customer's perspective. So business intelligence is about actionable insights that provide meaningful intelligence that fosters competitive advantage. And creating real-time dashboards about guest preferences that can be seen by the frontline staff also changes your engagement strategy. And this is one of the key things that I took away from that. So, and that leads me to a second point, which is about GIGX. Now, this is a term, I don't know whether it's already very popular, but I'd like to think I came up with it. But GIGX is guest interface and guest experiences. So who's in charge of next generation guest experiences? Now, one of the problems I also have with hospitality generally is that everybody's sort of swimming in this sea of sameness and all come up with clever new ideas to say the same thing. Now, the context of all of this is about understanding ecosystems. So companies are structured to have a CEO, a CFO, a CMO, and all the rest of it. But there is no data detective. Nobody employs and has a job as a person dedicated in your company whose job is to be a data detective, mining for data information and using that to turn it and convert it into intelligence. And why is that? I think that's one of the fundamental things we need to talk about, is that also organizational change drives your knowledge, because I also think there is this irrational obsession with data. And I don't think, rare data, big data, metadata, etc. It's all one thing, but if you don't have the right people analyzing this or giving and processing this from a business intelligence point of view, you have fundamental issues. So GIGX is next generation guest experiences, which are ecosystems. So imagine if a guest is checking into a Hilton hotel, and this gentleman is also somebody who likes Starbucks coffee, and that's Starbucks coffee every morning, takes an Uber to go for his meeting, and in the evening prefers to go for a CrossFit training session. Now that's his ecosystem of Reebok, Uber, Starbucks, and Hilton coming together. So how do these data sets then speak to each other? How do you know that you can create experiences around that? Now this requires hotel operators to look at their organizational structure and ensure that they have internal transformation agents who understand how to work with partners and build platforms that enable long-term positive impact. There are many companies obsessed about predictive insights, automated processes, seamless guest experiences, but they also forget about the people who make these things happen, the ones who develop the dashboards, direct the analytics, and implement the recommendation. So there's no point in investing in technology if the culture of change is an antagonizing one. And I can give you a great example of this, about how owning the data conversation has to come out of the box of e-commerce and revenue management and the CFO space, and how understanding you create experiences that are truly transformative also means that you've got to take technology and people on the same journey together. A classic example is there was an airline company in the US which realized that they could use data to improve their supply chain and make the supply chain management process more effective for usable parts on their engines. So let's say, if I'm going to give you a simple example, if a plane had a spark plug and they figured out that, gosh, we are running out of spark plugs on day X, so they would make sure there were more spark plugs on site a day before day X. In principle, what they didn't realize is that through this automation process, using technology to create hyper-intelligence within the company, they were also antagonizing the flight engineer who had been to flight school or engineering school to learn about the same exact problem identification problem, and soon realized that their culture was getting diluted because they were leaving the people behind while driving the technology part. So I think understanding how to use people in the context of creating an ecosystem of data-driven efficiencies with the right partners, using technology and human beings, and creating champions who understand whether they are data detectives, internal transformation agents, is a really integral part of it's got to be an integral part of your strategy. We talk about this fascinating conversation. Yogi Berra said, if you don't know where you're going, you'll not get there. And I find that quite, it's one of those classic idioms which actually works. If you think about it, no investment in data analytics will ever pay optimal dividends until the management identifies, understands, and focuses on the main drivers of value in a business. Now, there's an irrational obsession about data aggregation and analytic horsepower, but there's no point investing money in something that if you don't know where you're going to go and how you're going to fix it. So funneling data into streams of knowledge requires considered planning and implementation. It's not a data dump, it's not a data soup, that causes, these are things that cause havoc, and they can potentially hurt the performance of a business. And then you've also got a bigger problem when you're talking about data. You're talking about, deep personalization in now a privacy-hungry world, with rules like GDPR, etc. So there are all these challenges that you've got to be mindful of. So figuring out, how do you overcome these challenges, whether they are, correlational or causal, and you have to have a very tempered approach towards data. Data also, in my opinion, fatigues very quickly. Behavior patterns change. You can look at a number of these aspects that impact how businesses perform. There are very clever hotel companies and other travel companies which have been very good with managing currency fluctuations and yield management. So they've studied currency fluctuations can impact the choice of destinations. Scrutinizing all of that open source and closed data sets requires historic data also to map how certain trends are going to be playing out and be able to forecast how you take your business further. So this paranoia about rare data, I think a lot of these things don't really come into play unless you have the right effectiveness and intelligence assigned to your analysis. And I personally think conventional data sets can also drive that, that positive impact. So to share some thoughts on this, using data to design human experiences is not going to be about Internet of Things alone, and that yes, the minibar will one day be able to tell that John always likes orange juice at 11 o'clock. So how do you accelerate that? I've got 5 minutes, I've been prompted. So I sort of went back and I said, you know what, I'm not going to do the IT geeky thing. I want to speak more on a philosophical level, at a business management level. What can you do if you want to drive change using data? And how do you go about designing human experiences? Now, I went and I researched 4 steps. And I think this is where I will conclude on this. One is think big. I think hoteliers can learn a lot from tech companies on how these tech companies sell content and personalized experiences. If you all subscribe to Netflix, you'll know that no one Netflix screen looks anything like the other person's, because it's customized based on algorithms, etc., to recommend certain content which is suitable to your preferences. So in order to do that, you have an obligation to define your ambition for the future in an audacious manner. And you don't worry about solving these challenges just through customer data. And with 5G and AI literally at our doorsteps now, we're going to find that there's going to be a significant shift in how these problems are going to get solved. So data works only when humans do. And big data needs a big goal. So you have to have an audacious goal that can be scaled and focus on building personalized experiences for people across the world. Also, paradigm shifts need to happen internally on the way you create data-driven experiences. Great hoteliers, in my opinion, make profound psychologists because they understand the needs and demands at an intrinsic level of human needs, and this must be led by the leadership of the company. It can't be something that can be delegated to people in your e-commerce team. Number two, if you're going to design data-driven human experiences, you've got to take small steps. The main aim in tech-driven innovations is to garner momentum and to get your minimum viable product or your proof of concept up and running quickly. Hotels have the unique ability to harness tons of data about their customers, from habits to preferences, behavior patterns, recency, frequency, and value of customer relationships. Creating intersections in technology requires momentum, so you have an obligation to at least try and move fast. You start with small sets of data, small groups, road test an idea on a particular restaurant or one specific hotel, and then evaluate how to improve and make the appropriate changes. You have to focus on high impact and high value quick wins. The next thing that a lot of tech companies do, which hotel companies can learn from, is they iterate often. So you have a lot of changes. If you know your phone, you all get the usual update with the little red button saying update software, we've fixed a few glitches, etc. So designing data-driven human experiences also requires deep and meaningful discussions internally. You have to have an open, collaborative culture and an original thinking mindset. From defining your goals to identifying the problem and opportunity to building a powerful hypothesis and eventually testing effectiveness to achieving the desired results. These are typically the steps that tech companies do really well, and these need to be repeated in order to design potent data-driven experiences within your organization. So prototyping and evaluation is an iterative process, and it warrants generative thinking and action, which warrants customer engagement and dialogue also. You can't always do it. No point designing a data-driven human experience if you don't actually have any human engagement with the customers you serve. The last and most important point, which is really close to my heart, I wrote a book on compassion in capitalism, and I talk about return on empathy. I don't talk about return on investment. And driving culture in that factor is a very important aspect. An operating environment that seeks to leverage data to enhance business efficiencies and effectiveness needs to understand that your culture will eat your strategy for breakfast. So if your people aren't behind your business strategy, then it's not going to really go far. It's really important to understand the impact of technology on people, and this requires a closer look on how you currently communicate internally and share the importance and value of data and technology and its role within your company. People do business with people. So if artificial intelligence is the next chapter in data-driven human experiences, then I'm going to request you to please use analog intelligence to define and align to good human values. As I've always said, they make great business values. Thank you. Thank you.